Hello, EasyEquities community, and welcome to this session, which is all about Renergen, one of the most popular retail shares, which has often been in the news. My name is Carl, for those of you who haven't had the fortune of meeting yet, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at EasyEquities. And one of the best parts of my job is engaging with you, our community. So I thank you all for joining and for sending your questions, comments, and continuing to engage with us as we all work hard at growing our financial wealth. So I'm joined by the CEO of Renergen, Stefano Marani, who has been very keen to share news about his company, answer some questions, and really engage with the users. So welcome, Stefano, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, and it's a pleasure to address everyone.
So people can invest in Renergen in their ZAR wallet on the EasyEquities platform, and looking at the stats, we've got just under 36,000 users invested in Renergen. And that's about an 8% increase, the number of users that were invested a year ago. So some might say that they are the people that see value from the past and also people in this year that have seen value. The NAV invested is currently around 100 million, and the gender split is about 64% male, 36% female. Renergen's also available in the Australian wallet on the EasyEquities platform, which I need to remind myself of sometimes. I'm actually invested in that as well. And there we've got a small group of investors, about 700 investors. And so for those in the community who have forgotten, remember that you can invest with your rands, taking them investing in Australia, America, Britain, Euro, in shares like Tesla, Amazon, Meta, and Renergen in Australia. But let's get straight into the question, Stefano. And just to set the scene, maybe just remind us, what is Renergen's business and why should people invest in your share?
Thank you. And just before I forget, one other thing that's probably worth pointing out is the massive arbitrage potential between the two stocks. For instance, there's probably about a 30% gap between the price in Australia and South Africa.
Absolutely worth mentioning. Yeah, and for those of you who want some more information on that, Kayla from our team is very interested in that, and you can check out research.easyequities.co for more on that. So yeah, very valid point, Stefano. Thank you.
So for those of you that don't know the story, Renergen is the holder of the country's first and only onshore petroleum production right. That's quite a significant thing to have. That means that we've got the only license from government to be able to drill for natural gas, extract natural gas, and then produce the byproducts and sell the byproducts, or at least produce the components of the gas. The two gases in particular that we sell are LNG, or liquefied natural gas. We are in fact the first company in South Africa to produce LNG. We're also the first company in South Africa to sell LNG. And despite the fact that it's been available in the rest of the world for probably 4 or 5 decades, we are the first. The other thing that's interesting is that while we all know that there have been some spectacular gas finds in Mozambique, as a result of Renergen, South Africa produced LNG 2 weeks before Mozambique did, which is another, I mean, it's neither here nor there, but it's still a nice, proudly South African fact.
Yeah, we like coming first, so that's good.
Even if it's only by a point.
Exactly.
The second thing that's obviously the more publicized and the sexier part of the business is helium. So we separate the helium from the natural gas. We cool it down to a chilly minus 269 degrees Celsius. And that's only 3 above absolute zero. And then at that point, it's in liquefied form. We then stick it into an ISO container and we then ship it overseas, where it's used in all sorts of things like rockets, semiconductors, the manufacturing of microchips, basically. So cell phones, TVs, computers, any technology, right down to your blender, cannot exist today without helium. But then it's also used in things like making fiber optic cables, welding, specialist welding, leak detection, and then probably the single largest use at the moment as it stands today is in MRIs. So you cannot make an MRI machine and you cannot go for an MRI without helium. And so that's what we do. We're essentially an upstream producer of this gas, and then we're vertically integrated all the way right down to the point where we purify and sell the gas to the end customer.
So somebody that's followed your story and just based on what you've said now, I mean, it sounds like such a good news story. Seems that you're on track with your plans. Why then do you think your share price has been under pressure, and especially recently?
Look, a few things. I mean, the one thing that we're not going to do is hide behind the fact that we were delayed on the turn on of the plant. We've owned that up front. We are delayed, um, and while the delays are all explainable, it doesn't make it any easier. The fact is that the plant got turned on late.
Yeah.
Helium is to be turned on imminently, but the fact is it's not on yet because we did suffer a leak in the cold box. We did produce liquid helium. So that, to my mind, is already a major de-risking event, because the fact is that the equipment does exactly what it says it should do. The fact that there is a leak, that is a mechanical thing and that can be repaired. But the point is that the equipment does what the equipment needs to do.
Right.
The more recent pressure that the stock came under was really, and I put my hand up for this, and I assume responsibility for this. The lack of confidence that was inspired through social media, through questions being raised, and me not addressing it properly. And again, not scared to hide behind the fact. I take responsibility for the fact that it could have been handled significantly better than it was. But that aside, we then came out to the market. We addressed all of the concerns. We released the SENS announcement. I've been doing a lot of press interviews. There's lots of publications and journalists that are very keen to try and get the inside scoop on all of this and understand better exactly what the crux of the thing is. And we've explained by and large everything that was put out there in the public domain and where the discrepancies are, and the fact that, truth be told, everything that we've said is absolutely factual and it's absolutely straight. But what it did highlight was that perhaps the way in which we delivered the narrative could have been done better, because these questions existed in the first place, and perhaps moving forward we need to be more thorough in the way that we deliver the narrative. But nothing inaccurate was put out there. Nothing misleading was put out there. It's perhaps just the case that we need to be more attentive to when we put things out there, to being more mindful to make sure that things can't be read or misinterpreted.
Maybe back to the plant. I mean, phase one, I think, is nearing completion. What's happening in preparation for phase two, and maybe give us as investors a little bit of insight and comfort around the timelines for that.
So the phase two project, we're all aware that it's a significantly larger project than the first phase. Phase two, just to give you some context to it, is a plant that will produce an order of magnitude of about 12 to 15 times more gas than the first phase. So it's a big plant. Right. It's a very significant plant. In terms of its funding, it will have funding supplied or acquired through debt and equity. On the debt side, we've already made massive inroads in this regard. Well, not inroads, we've already completed the securing of the funding. And there are two main sources of debt funding for the project. The first source is the United States government through an entity called the USDFC. So it's basically the equivalent of the United States' IDC. They've approved a loan of $500 million for the phase two construction. And that's subject to a few CPs, the important one being the provision of equity by Renergen. Then the second lender is Standard Bank of South Africa. They've come to the table with a further $250 million on the same loan terms, however, a slightly different interest rate. But in essence, it's a total debt package of about $750 million, and that will go towards the construction of phase two. There is an equity component that needs to be raised, and the equity component is going to be done in two tranches. And the reason that we're doing it in two tranches is to ensure that we minimize dilution. The last thing that we want to do is go and raise all of the equity up front and therefore end up diluting shareholders significantly. So I think that probably speaks to one of the earlier questions in terms of why is the share price come under pressure. I think there's been somewhat of a feeling that we're going to do all of the equity up front, and then that's going to result in disproportionate dilution. The fact of the matter is that we don't need to do all of the equity up front. The debt has been locked in. The debt is on the basis of a drawdown, and as we draw down, as long as we maintain debt to equity, we put in the equity, we draw down. Now, we have to raise a minimum amount of equity up front in order to be able to construct a plant that operates at 30 million standard cubic feet per day. And that's what we're going to do. So the initial tranche of equity that we're raising is a total of $205 million, and that's being done through two components. One component is an IPO on the NASDAQ, which we've already mentioned before. So we're in the preparation of doing that. And then there's a second component which relates to a private side transaction. We've already put out into the market the fact that we are working on a private side transaction, and those are the sources and uses of how we get to the point where we've got a fully operational plant. Once we've done that, we will then assess, and market conditions willing, if there is an opportune time for us to opportunistically go out and raise the final tranche of equity to bring the larger plant online, we will do so, but never at the expense of more dilution than is absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Stefano, just a matter of interest, when phase 2 is complete, how many people will Renergen be employing? Do you have a sense of that on hand?
Yeah, so there's direct and indirect employment. Within the company itself, we're probably going to have a staffing complement of about 140 people, which is relatively low for a company that'll be producing the kinds of revenue numbers that a phase 2 operation would produce. But the indirect number of jobs that something like this would create is going to be quite significant. We're anticipating that there's probably going to be at least 850 temporary jobs during the construction. And then over and above that, there are the knock-on impacts. So selling LNG as a fuel, that fuel is going to have to be received somewhere and then on-sold, and there will be a number of indirect jobs that get created as a result. We're going to have to self-generate our own power in phase 2. And no one wants to be susceptible to load shedding, and we've got the energy. So we will use our waste gases in order to self-generate our power. So we will be completely agnostic to the grid. And that in and of itself will also create additional employment. There are many ways in which this entity then creates a significant amount of employment. If you consider the one thing in particular that certainly the Free State government has already made mention of, and this is in the public domain, is that they have a very serious intention to create an SEZ, or a special economic zone, around our plant, and then use the availability of energy over there as a catalyst to drive investment in the area. And if you think about it, it's perfectly logical. Right now, the manufacturing hub of South Africa is the Springs area, Ekurhuleni. But logically, it doesn't have the same kind of advantages as the Free State. Ekurhuleni's main port is Durban. Fine, Ekurhuleni does have access to a larger workforce being close to Johannesburg, but it's plagued by the same power problems as everywhere else in the country. It's got massive traffic. Land is expensive. Buildings are expensive. Labor is more expensive. By contrast, you look at the Free State. Free State is slap bang in the middle of the country. You've got access to the N1, the N3, the N5, and the N11 highways. You have access to large tracts of land, which is significantly cheaper than in Johannesburg. With the LNG plant there, we could literally just plug gas into an SEZ over there, where people could literally just open up the tap and have gas on demand and never have to worry about concerns around energy availability. Massive reduction in greenhouse gases, because producing power from gas or using gas as an alternative to diesel has a very significant and material reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And so you get the sustainability benefits, you get the security of supply benefits, and you end up in a position where you're not constrained to one port. You can use all the ports plus the Free State has an enormous workforce and very highly skilled, thanks to the mines in the area. So you're addressing so many issues within the area, and that's why the Free State is so keen on developing that into an SEZ. And you know, we're completely on board with that. So you want to talk about job creation, and you start to look at these plans that our designation as a SIP or a strategic infrastructure project in the country. All of a sudden, this starts to become very meaningful, and it has the potential to truly transform the province, which is in desperate need of economic upliftment.
Very interesting. And just as a reminder to us, what did you expect the production to be in phase 1 and 2?
Phase 1 has a nameplate capacity of around 2,500 gigajoules. Not that I expect many people on this call to know what a gigajoule is.
I was just going to ask you. Yeah, I certainly don't.
All right. So if anyone wants to do conversions on the back of a matchbox, 1 gigajoule is the same amount of energy as contained in 27.7 liters of diesel. That gives you a rough feel for what a gigajoule is.
Cool.
And we produce around 2,500 of those a day in phase 1. In phase 1, the nameplate capacity, or at least the daily expected production of helium in phase 1, is going to be a little over 300 kilograms of helium. Now, we don't sell helium in kilograms. We sell it in another unit of measure, which is even more confusing. So I won't confuse everyone with that. But suffice it to say, it's like roughly in the ballpark. It's around 300 kilograms of helium.
Okay.
The phase 2 project is back to gigajoules now, 34,000 gigajoules per day, compared to 2,500 from phase 1.
Yeah, massive.
That in energy terms, if you were trying to work that out, is around 1 million liters of diesel a day. That's how much energy it is. It's big.
Oh, yeah, it is massive.
Helium, by contrast, sounds really small. It's 4.2 tons of helium per day. But now let me put this in context. 4.2 tons of helium per day is between 6 and 8% of the entire planet's supply of helium. It is a very rare gas. It is a very expensive gas. It is a very valuable gas to produce.
Cool. Very interesting.
That makes us a leading, where phase 2 is on, that makes us a leading player in the global helium market. 8% from a single project. It's big.
Giving us all these facts and telling the story, and commenting earlier that you feel that you could have told your story better, perhaps. Some of the other criticism that's been leveled at you, and not only at you, is paid for research, using researchers that are paid for producing work. Now, certainly not unique. You're not the first or last company to do this. But as retail investors, you know, does that give us comfort? I mean, can we really trust research that's paid for in this way? Maybe just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I see a lot of the comments, and it's important. It's very important to understand that any research that you consume is going to be paid for in one way or another, whether the company pays directly or whether it's the bank that earns fees from the company that then produces the research on behalf of the company. At some point, somebody gets paid to do it. That's the first thing that you need to understand. Therefore, as the reader and consumer of research, you need to understand that you need to take a critical look at the research that you're consuming and just do a sensibility check. The reason that companies like us deploy research is twofold. The first is that the research that gets published in South Africa on the JSE, the top 40 stocks are largely covered by the research brokers, and that's considered independent research that the company doesn't have to pay for. And the reason that a stockbroker would produce research on a company is because they do such high volumes and turnover in the top 40 stocks that it's worth their while to pay analysts to come in and do the research so that they can attract more customers, so that they can influence more turnover in those stocks. And so the top 40 stocks out of the 300, generally speaking, are independent research that's not paid for, or at least not directly. Outside of that, there are only a handful of counters in the remaining top 100 where you still have free research. The minute that you leave the top 100, It's practically impossible to find a stock where anyone is going to do any research whatsoever. So you can pretty much look at any small cap stock and all research will be paid for research. And I don't believe that any single company out there has ever hidden this fact. So this shouldn't be controversial. This is the way that it's done in the entire world. Now, when it comes to how do you verify the independence and make sure that what you're consuming is of a high enough quality, that's where you need to do your homework on the research analyst. What does a research analyst's profile look like in terms of, have they won awards in terms of their ratings? Is the diligence that they do very thorough? Have they considered more risks? Don't read the opening paragraph of the research report. Read the entire research report. Make sure that everything hangs together properly. Make sure that there's a proper narrative. Does the analyst in question produce research that often attracts criticism from other knowledgeable investors? And by other knowledgeable investors, I'm not talking about social media. I think social media is a very, very dangerous game these days. Trust me, I've been there. The point is that there are ways to check. Yeah, just because we pay an analyst to do research doesn't mean that we can influence what the research looks like. You pay for the research, and you're paying for their time. The research analyst will then take the time to look at the publicly available information. They will produce a report. And sometimes as a company, you don't like what they publish. And trust me, it happens. And it's not cool because you feel like you're paying them, but they're still not saying what you want them to say. But you've got very, very limited ability to actually change their minds just on the basis of a paycheck. The only way that they're going to change their mind is if you can convince them through sound reasoning and arguments. And that, again, comes down to the quality of the research analyst.
Yeah.
I reiterate, if the research analyst is an analyst that tends to be more respected in the market or has won more awards in the market, then that's probably pretty good research to consume.
Yeah, it's really interesting because one of the things I'm passionate about at EasyEquities, and we do it well at times, but more often than not well enough, is engaging with CEOs like yourself on the platform, because our users always respond really well to it. And I, really want to encourage other CEOs, executives of companies to be in touch. My email address is carl@easyequities.co.za, because we, would love to expose more CEOs, more stories to investors. And there's also, I think, sometimes this fallacy that retail investors are only small. We love small investors, but there's the whole gambit of investors, and we need to tell the stories more to give people an opportunity to decide whether they want to invest in a particular share or not. And once you've heard the story and you invest, I think it's also important to not have knee-jerk reactions. If you did your research, why are you invested in the share? If those fundamental reasons haven't changed, then you stay invested. So it's really interesting.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And I've maintained this, Carl. I really, what you say resonates, and it's the one thing that, as an economy, we're getting wrong. Take Renergen out of this. As an economy, we're getting wrong in that we're not supporting the small caps enough. Economic growth is derived from building small caps into large caps.
Absolutely.
And then letting those large caps go off and do what they need to do, and they'll get their own support, and then creating a new wave of small caps. And that's how you grow economies. And
I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Stefano. I mean, Kayla, who works with us, is really passionate about small caps, penny stocks, and the like. And he makes the point that there's so much value within those shares. I struggle to get Kayla to focus on anything other than small caps. But it is so important for the economy. I want to ask you, as directors, that come into criticism, and fairly so. I think it's that is the prerogative of investors, the role of journalists to question, sometimes perhaps not in the right way in the social media environment, and the emotion attached around it. But it's wonderful that people are engaged in a share and asking questions. And one of the things perhaps worth asking is, have you as directors disclosed all your dealings? And are you comfortable with some of the comments around that?
Yeah, I mean, we're completely beyond reproach on that front. Since the start of this journey, the only two disposals that I've made, and both were fully disclosed on the JSE in a sense. The first one was a donation to my mother, sort of a thank you, and then the second one was a recent stock award that I got under the bonus share plan. The scheme that we have is set up so that, let's assume you are granted 100 shares, then 45 shares are sold into the market to pay Mr. Kiswetter, and then you get the 55 shares. And that was done, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, I think, before our closed period started. But that was it. Net, I've only increased my shares.
I think we can also do more education as a community around share schemes, etc. Because I think there is a fallacy that people like you get these shares for free. You don't have to pay tax on them, and that you sit around on billions. And you certainly don't have to answer this. You can't answer it, shouldn't answer this. But I will make a prediction that I don't think you're a billionaire sitting on assets. You've probably got far more debt than anything else. And hoping and believing in your own story as much as the Renergen investors. So, Stefano, I want to wish you well. I think it's been great that there's been this debate around Renergen. It's certainly been very positive from an EasyEquities community perspective. With said, 35,000 plus users, highly engaged, interested in this share. We look forward to your ongoing story. Please keep us posted. Thanks for taking time. And yeah, I'm going to give you the final word on this session with the EasyEquities. Anything you'd like to leave us with?
Look, I'm just going to say that EasyEquities, you guys need to keep doing what you're doing. It's the investors and the believers in the small cap sectors that are going to drive this economy forward. And it's the disruption that is what really gets things going. And yeah, EasyEquities has been a great disruptor in that field. So the only thing that I can do is compliment Carl, you and your team on a tidy ship. And tell the universe of investors out there, and this is not just not for a minute saying invest in Renergen. What I am doing is I am saying, keep your mind open to the small cap opportunities. We have some fundamentally amazing little companies. We are best in the class in some cases in the world. There are some truly spectacular growth stories out there. Do your homework, find a company, get passionate about it, get stuck in. It'll be volatile. Small caps are always the most volatile sector. That goes without saying. But the more and more as a society, we can club together and we can put our shoulders behind a story and really just push the story forward, the quicker South Africa is going to turn around its current doldrums and get us back on top where we should be.
Thank you very much for that. And I think, what I'm left with after this chat with you is we can all, including EasyEquities, do way better at telling our stories to investors, engaging more. So that's a good reminder. Research, check out research.easyequities.coza. Check out Financial Mail, Ghost Mail, listen to news on RSG, Biz News. There's a whole wealth of opportunities out there that is free to investors. There's some fantastic podcasts, so absolutely do your research, investigate your own risk appetite, find those nuggets, and I wish you all well at Renergen as a staff and as a community. Thanks for all that you do, and to all the investors out there, good luck and continue your path of financial freedom. Thanks very much, Stefano, and keep well, everybody. Cheers.